Thank you very much for joining us this evening in our ongoing review, looking in some detail at the different post-war landscapes which have been added to the Historic England Register in 2020. Tonight we're on the second talk in the mini section looking at landscapes to private estates. So last week we heard about the Span estate at Field End and how the newer ways of thinking about planning of housing and neighbourhoods and cars and establishing new communities spread between nations and different European countries, and specifically the design and management ideas that Span introduced in their design to create a middle-class community. This week we'll hear about the landscape setting created for a luxury housing development situated behind the Edgware Road in London. Our objective with these talks is to raise awareness about the work, the ideas and thinking of the original designers, and also how these sites are now looking, and to see what we can learn from this and take forward, and to find out more where the relevant archives are and what makes these places still so very special. So this week, we're really pleased to have 3 speakers. And we begin with Cristina Ruffalo. She's a landscape architect and founding director of Refolo Landscape Architects. She's on the High Street Task Force team as a stormwater management and biodiversity expert and regularly lectures on SUDS at the University of Greenwich. Her practice was appointed by the church commissioners, landlords and original developers of Burwood Place to refurbish the landscape here. And for this, they won numerous awards, including the LI 2020 Award for Excellence in Horticulture and Planting Design for their work at this site. So Cristina, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Annabelle, and thank you for inviting me to talk about the water gardens, and I look forward to the other presenters as well. So I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to stop my video and share the screen. So if everybody can see my screen. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Perfect. 2 seconds. So basically, the Water Gardens is located in the Hyde Park estate, and it's a site that is near Hyde Park and between Hyde Park and Paddington. And here we have the Edgware Road. So it's an amazingly busy area of London, high pollution. And if you're walking around here on the Edgware Road, you would not know that there was this hidden gem behind these buildings. In terms of the Hyde Park estate and the Water Gardens, the landscape architect was Philip Hicks, who completed the scheme, the landscape, in 1966. And the architects were Trehan and Nerman, with Chris Whitaker as the lead architect. Chris Whitaker was actually a friend of Philip Hicks, and they attended the Architecture Association together. And when he was designing these buildings, he actually asked Philip Hicks, who had an office nearby, whether he wanted to design the garden. Now, in terms of who Philip Hicks was, he was a modernist landscape architect who was keen to design the space as a space where you could socialize and be viewed from above. The intricate geometries that you see on this space are amazing for the time, and the SUD system that I will talk about later is also surprisingly advanced. The area is 5,000 square meters. It is a suspended podium deck over a car park. Here you can see the voids of the car park. This is an artist sketch from the 1960s. And 2/3 of this is covered by water. So there's a shallow pond, which is about 1/2 meter high in water, and it has numerous numbers of fish. The beauty of the space is how the fluidity of the water contrast with the sharp edges of the concrete. And it's amazing how you can see the actual inspiration that could have influenced Philip Hicks. What we can see is, for example, Piet Mondrian influence in there in the modernist disposition of the architecture, but also the jetting terraces that we see in the National Theatre in this model from 1965, when actually Dennis Lusden was trying to convince the local authority to build the National Theatre. And the art was particularly important influence for the modernist architects of the time. So in terms of other influences that the scheme has had is definitely St. James Place from Dennis Lusden was a big influence, because Chris Whitaker in his article, The Water Gardens, an Underrated Corner of the Capital of the 20th Century, he actually did go and look at St. James Place, and they were interested in how the split levels of the flats would fit together. And the inspiration, as we can see here, of these split levels was a direct influence between the two. So there was like a connection between the two designers, and maybe an influence in terms of how Philipp Hicks developed his design. In terms of Philipp Hicks' other schemes, he was the landscape architect for the Bird's Eye building, Walton Court, and unfortunately no longer there. And the Sanderson Hotel. Here we have an old image of the Sanderson, where it was actually under a near a car park at the entrance of the space, which was not a hotel at the time. And here is the actual courtyard, which has been moved internally and has become more sort of Japanese looking, but it's the same one. They just like repositioned it. Here on the left-hand side, you can see the water gardens and how you have this beautiful juxtaposition of geometries, which you can already see the rhythm of how the architecture of the building is making a connection with the landscape, with this vertical rhythm here, with these vertical bars and these horizontal lines. As Chris Whitaker in his article wrote, there's a constant dialogue between architecture, the landscape, and the building. So in terms of potential inspiration from the water gardens, how could the water gardens maybe have inspired other schemes? The water gardens was completed in 1966, and we can see this concrete rhythm and texture across the whole of the podium deck. We can see these kind of elevated walkway with these columns, and we find them again on the Barbican estate, which was built between 1965 and 76, these jetting terraces, again here from Philipp Hicks' design. We have this beautiful concrete nibs that create these geometries. They're absolutely fantastic. And during the refurbishment, we did everything we could to preserve them, to the point that I was on site almost every day, making sure that they were not destroyed. These nibs haven't been looked after for a long time, as there was a misunderstanding of how beautiful this corner of London was, and so maybe they were used even to sort of climb the planters. But you can see this is artwork within the water garden itself, and it could have been an influence even to how Carlo Scarpa designed his Brion cemetery in Venice, because actually Carlo Scarpa was in London in 1969 and could have seen the water gardens. You know, there could be a connection there. So this is Philipp Hicks. Later, Philipp Hicks moved to Canada. Not a lot is known about him, but hopefully Dominic will find more information, will have enlightened us with more information about this amazing designer. He died, unfortunately, in 2017, when we just started working on the water garden. So I tried to find out about him, contact him, but it was not possible. One thing that is quite important is for Philipp Hicks, symbols were key in the design, and he just saw the landscape not as just a visual, but as a total experience. And this is an extract from the Journal of Canadian Society of Landscape Architects in 1999, where he can see water specifically as such an important experience. And so here is already giving an overview, for example, how it's such a essential symbolic element, and how the landscape architect uses it, how you can walk beside it, how you cross over a bridge, look down on it and see the fish and the plant life, how the light playing on its surface and listen to its movement, watch the waterfalls waterfalling. It's like he's almost talking about the water gardens later on in his life. And so that all this brought an inspiration of how to refurbish the water garden, how to give it a life that was at the same time modernist, but also brought back were the intentions of the designer itself. So the refurbishment and the planning happened between 2016 and 2020, and these were the we were the lead designers, and drainage from Cundall, the project managers, Project Colliers International, and Makers, the main contractor, with Bartholomew, the landscape contractor, and Aquajoy did the ponds and water features, and soil specification by Tim O'Hare. Unfortunately, the water gardens, after 50 years of performing very well, considering when it was built, started leaking. And in fact, we found some old letters where the garden had started leaking very early on in the late 60s, as soon as it was built. Possibly because it did not have any waterproofing layer. It was directly, we had the water directly onto the actual concrete slab. So you can see here, this is the Undercroft car park. That water is just going everywhere. Roots are sort of penetrating the concrete slab, and you have planting growing on the actual paving, these were the old paving that had been already changed a couple of times. Here we have the Undercroft car park voids, which were considerably sort of taxing in terms of fumes and pollution from going actually onto the water garden. And also we had a lot of antisocial behavior because of this connection with the street level and the location in Edgware Road. So the gardens wasn't used a lot, and at night it was quite dangerous. And this is what was on the ponds when we drained the ponds, because over the 50 years there was a lot of soil, unfortunately, it naturally had accumulated. So this is what happened then when the whole water garden had to be cleared. There was no way that we could keep the existing vegetation without in place, because everything had to be completely waterproof. Here's the start of the waterproof where the pond is, and it will continue across the whole area. There was a triple layer, and so there was considerable investment trying to save the space, and the investment was particularly important in trying to have the water gardens, the ponds, back where they are now. It would have been easier, like it happened in many other schemes, to just change it or demolish it. It would have been much cheaper, but no, there was a commitment to have those ponds back. And the ponds did host about 400 fish that were sent to a fish farm and kept away and then brought back here in place. So this is the design of the scheme, and the planting was reinstated, and there was a reinterpretation of the actual paving because we couldn't keep the old paving, and there was a request to bring something that would complement the existing design. So in terms of the SUDS feature of the scheme, I mean, it is the water garden, so water is the most important factor. But the most amazing part is that these planters, once we drained the whole scheme, once we drained the whole site, we realized that the planters are actually connected with the pond, which is something that we had not seen before in a podium deck, and is incredibly innovative. So the same pond, the same water level of the pond carries on within the bottom half of the planter, which is about 1 meter high. And this means that the roots of these trees have a constant supply of water. And that's why in such a confined space, you could have mature trees as the ones that actually were planned very early on at the water gardens at Philip Hicks' time. So through capillary action, the water is absorbed, which makes the system incredibly self-sufficient. We had to install an irrigation system, at least for the first few years, to get the plant starting, but then these plants can easily be self-sufficient. And so what we did is we realized that beneath the podium deck, we had about 700 millimeters of void. And we decided to install a water harvesting system, which you can see here, to then collect stormwater and feed the plants that were within the rain roofs and also the large planters. This means that the whole of the water garden is actually now composed of water, not only 2/3, but almost like 4/5 of the actual garden. This is being a blue roof. So this is the water garden today, and you can see it had to be waterproof. There's half of this planter is beneath the water. And here you can see on the left-hand side, this kind of connection, these holes that connect directly with the pond. Now, over the years, these were slightly misunderstood because it couldn't be, it was a bit weird. You had like soil coming out of it, so they were blocked. But we reopened these and we reinstated a SUD system, which we think is amazing. You can see, for example, this planter here is almost completely buried in water, just underwater. And so the plants that we had to choose for this very large planter, which are 8 meters by 8, had to be suitable in that environment and had to withstand both sort of wet conditions, but also at the surface more dry conditions, and plants seem to be thriving. We introduced an enormous amount of plants, about 143 different species and over 30,000 plants. Because we had to remove all these plants, they had to be brought back. We couldn't salvage them, but we made sure that there was a good mix of grasses, perennials, and different species and aquatic species, and there was interest across the year. So if you go to the water garden in different months of the year, including winter, you will always find some interest. And now, for example, we have a series of bulbs with a blue and yellow theme and white theme that are coming out and which look amazing. So one thing that we wanted to reinstate in the water garden was the old original design of having a large tree per planter. And it was something that when we met the residents of the water gardens during their consultation, they were totally heartbroken that we would have to remove the mature trees, but we couldn't do otherwise because we had to waterproof the whole decking. And so we decided to reintroduce semi-mature trees in these planters, which considerably, it was a considerably difficult task. So you can see they're about more than a meter deep, about 1.2, and actually to lift these and position them in place was difficult. But all the nibs of the planter, the concrete brutalist features, were covered to protect them. And this is the water gardens today, with these planters now, each with a single mature tree in the middle, which has a particular reason to be there. So this is the swamp cypress, which is thriving now. This is the willow. And these that you see here are actually the voids that we had previously connecting to the car park. The reason these had to be filled is because the car park is now a safe store, and which is what funded the actual water gardens. So these are, in fact, green roofs that hold water themselves, and I'll talk about these briefly afterwards. So in terms of other image of the current water gardens, the paving is being designed to lead to particular features in the middle, like this round circular area, which is like a pivoting area across the garden, and it was designed to enhance the current linearity of the brutalist features whilst being in a modernist setting. This, as I mentioned earlier, is the void to the car park, and this is the green roof recently planted. And then this is how it looks today, with the idea of having this movement of grasses as the water garden is particularly windy. So to see having water and plant features moving is quite an experience. Like Philip Hicks says, landscape is about the experience. It's not just about a visual feeling, it's about experiencing a whole sort of beauty of nature. So in terms of these green roofs, they are semi-intensive. They hold water permanently to feed the substrate, and then so this again is to an extensive 200 square meters of semi-intensive roofs, which with 230 deep substrate was quite an achievement. And these are built over metal planters, and they can attenuate about 20,000 litres of rainwater. So again, this is an image of the water gardens today, and the water is also filtered through the aquatic planting as it drains from the paving. And the design of the planting aims at keeping a sort of level linearity, but having these kind of large trees in the middle, which is what we had and seen from Philip Hicks' original design. This is the aquatic ecology, and we made sure that we could have plants within the ponds as you had them initially, but to confine them so the ponds wouldn't be silted up by soil. These were sort of confined within specific underwater planters, with these boulders reinstated within the pond to the Philip Hicks design as he had on the original images that we have seen earlier. And here we have a resident heron that is still there and is feasting on the 400 plus fish that we have in the pond, mainly carp, koi carp. So in terms of the design of the paving, this was about, again, water. It was a transition, as a wave going through the paving and trying to capture that linearity that you can also see in the water features and in the concrete. The idea was to bring this concrete mass and transfer the mass into the kinetic energy of water through this rhythm and movement across the garden. And so this is, again, another image of the master plan. And this is how the actual paving leads towards the concrete planters to visualize the planting, but also this linearity is depicted across the area. So to bring together the whole design, but also the having a constant dialogue with the buildings in terms of the tones of grey that you have, and this being almost like water ripples, and that linearity we find again across the railings. This is the water garden seen from above as it was just planted, and this is today as the trees are growing and it's flourishing. And then again, this is an image, a recent image from last year. And again, this linearity, the water features, it was important for Philip Hicks that the water feature were experienced as you walked through a bridge, as I mentioned in this article, and you could experience water at its fullest. Even we had to introduce new seats, but we didn't want just to put some bland timber seats. We had these bespoke made, so it was a reinterpretation of an existing seat. And we had these made in concrete with imprints of timber, so they will look in place, and also the design would be reminiscent of the concrete pillars, which have this kind of a trapezoid shape. And most important, the lighting design at night, we were keen that it would highlight the concrete brutalist features within this modernist setting. And so it would highlight these nibs, and it would bring sort of together the whole design. And this was the rhythm across the covered walkway, highlighting the bricks, the beauty of the texture of these bricks. And then having the reflection of the water onto the underside of the elevated jetting terraces, and then seeing how the concrete planters would reflect onto this paving, which was actually a reflective paving, as you can see, almost like water filtering through, almost like the planter reflecting itself and continuing the rhythm, the horizontal rhythm across on the paving. And at night, again, there is the illusion that water actually filters inside the paving, through the paving, and it creates that kind of connectivity, cohesion across the whole design, so that water is the main theme across the whole area. So thank you for listening, and I now I'll stop sharing, and I think I have just done 20 minutes, if that is correct.
Bro, thank you very much, Christina. That was fantastic. Thank you. So now we move on to Dominic. So Dominic Cole is a landscape architect and president of the Gardens Trust. He was the designer of the Eden project and now specializes in historic parks and gardens, for which he's won many prestigious awards. He's always busy, played a vital role in the restoration of Jellicoe's water gardens at Hemel Hempstead, and his recent investigations include the historical development of the gardens at the Temple and the original designs for the landscape of Churchill Gardens, which we heard a few months ago, and now also Philip Hicks's work. So over to you, Dominic. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We might have to nip through this a bit. We're going to explore the designer of this fabulous water garden and some of his other work. But firstly, thank you hugely to Christina. You've explained to me some things that I didn't know, and hopefully I will explain some things that you didn't know. Philip Hicks, landscape architect, created amazing projects in both the UK and Canada over his 96 years. He was born in Australia in 1921, trained and worked in the UK, moved to Canada in the 1970s, where he made more beautiful works, wrote, critiqued, made friends, and died in 2017. So this is the Edgware Road in London, Burwood Place, facing onto Edgware Road, about halfway between Edgware Road Tube Station and Marble Arch. The 3-acre site is owned by the Church commissioners and has a long history before this. Next slide, please. Sorry, I'm going to repeat a bit, but architects in 1966, mainly residential use with a few commercial outlets for, say, facing onto Edgware Road. The site has residential blocks around a central open space with parking below and a raised deck over the parking. The job architect, Chris Whitaker, had trained at the AA with Philip Hicks. He bumped into him in the street and asked if he would like to work with him. Next slide. Residents arriving by car would enter at street level from Burwood Place and drive along the arcade beside the water garden. Next. Which the water garden is concealed below, the water garden is built over a concrete deck, which we've heard about, and it fills the whole of the central courtyard. Next. Once parked, residents will walk up various routes, spiral staircase in this case, with the bold tiled walls and concrete abstract. Next, yeah. This is Philipp Hicks around the time that he worked on the project. Excuse me. He was born in Australia to a bishop father, educated at Westminster School in the 1930s, where his fellow pupils included Peter Ustinov, Anthony Wedgwood Benn, and the son of von Ribbentrop, who was the pre-Second World War German ambassador to the UK. Hicks trained at the AA in 1952. Next. That's another of the spiral stairs. We saw it earlier, connecting the basement parking with the access to residents' flats. Anybody parking would walk up through the stairs that we've seen via the deck water garden, a rather nice experience to get to your flat. Next. The deck water garden and one of the voids that created light and air to the parking below. Hicks was presented with a level concrete roof over the parking and introduced a series of low walls to create the pools and planters. Next. The simple combination of angular pools and planters in plan was enhanced by introducing similar angular interactions in the vertical layout. Next. The levels and planes were made using simple materials, mainly concrete, here seen in the moulding and finish of poured concrete, exposed aggregate and simple concrete paving. Next. The planters appear to float. In this slide showing one of the weeping willows that were a key element of Hicks' simple planting scheme. Black reflective water suggesting depth and simple planting reflecting and dancing in the light. Next. When I saw it first, some 15 years ago, some of the original planting had been added to quite sensitively here with the weeping mulberry. Next. So I've been trying to understand more about Philip Hicks and his work and can show you a couple more of his 1960s projects. This is the underground car park in Cavendish Square, north of Oxford Street. Next. Where Hicks designed the planting over the underground parking. After studying at the AA, he visited Switzerland and wrote about gardens he saw that were built on top of underground garages in Bern and in Geneva. Next. Another smaller but exquisite example of his designs is the central courtyard of what was the Sanderson Wallpaper Showrooms, also near Oxford Street, now the Sanderson Hotel. It was called a rock garden, far from the current Bunn rock gardens of the Surrey vernacular, and a garden made with different types of rocks. Here at Sanderson, he worked with the sculptor designer Jupp Dernbach-Meyen, and the content and rock work is mostly by Jupp. Next. Jupp, who sculpted the rock. Hicks created the layout and levels and selected the plants, including the multi-stemmed weeping beech. He took Mr. Sanderson to Waterer's nursery in person. Sanderson had been to America to see how retail was done and loved the idea of welcoming customers to his showroom in their own cars and into the basement parking area, passing by this tiny courtyard. Next. Jupp Dernbach-Meyen used stone and rocks in a variety of ways. This is the granite boulder. Next. The obelisk. Apologies for my photos. These are copies of photos that I took 20 odd years ago. Next. That's the obelisk with the beautiful, these are boulders, natural boulders, but sliced. I kind of think it looks like mortadella in the base of the very shallow pool. Next. And a whole series of fantastic mosaic walls, all by Dernbach-Meyen. And here next, we see him in his own self-portrait, quite pleased with himself. Next. These articulated walls are reminiscent of the work of the sculptor Ben Nicholson. Next. And you may remember Meyen's most well-known piece, the fountains at the base of Centrepoint, sadly now gone. Next. So back to Philipp Hicks, here at the Co-op Permanent Building Society in High Holborn. The drawings that I'm going to show you were a fantastic discovery that I only made just after Christmas this year, which I'll explain a little bit more later. But this is one of Hicks's original drawings, color rendered, as you can see, and you can see the use of rectangles and planes and interlocking geometry that we see at the Water Garden. Next. And the Bird's Eye headquarters at Walton-on-Thames, where Hicks designed 3 internal courtyards, and again collaborated with a sculptor, this time Alan Collins, and again using the simple geometric planes and shallow level changes. Next. And this is Hicks's original design for that same courtyard. A bit of an example of how landscape architects drew in those days, I still do, which gives you a very good sense of the space and the ideas that he was trying to create. Next. Bird's Eye originally kept penguins in the courtyard. Bird's Eye, of course, being frozen food linked to penguins, and flamingos in another. Unfortunately, the birds were a bit smelly and eventually rehoused at London Zoo. Next. Hicks was an observer and creator. This is one of his abstract paintings, which reflects his use of geometric shapes and the geometric shapes that he used in his landscape designs. After moving to Canada in the 1970s, he carried on designing around buildings and gardens, over 500 projects, and he wrote weekly articles and critiques in his local paper. Next. There he is in his 80s. He was persuaded to move to Canada by his old friend Charles Cullum, who had also trained with him at the AA, and they shared a love of motorbikes and rock climbing outdoors. After the AA, he tried town planning, which he disliked, and swapped to landscape architecture at Durham University. He was then a founder member of the Arboricultural Association in London. Next. He set up his own practice in Manchester Square, London. This is a letter heading from the 1970s. Next. He was exceptionally organized. This is his own note of his own file references. There's a lot more of this. All of this collection, anything I'm showing you from the Philipp Hicks estate is going to be deposited at Folar. So it'll be available to all of you. There's also an extensive slide collection, which I have not drawn on in this presentation. Next. And this, I just wanted to show you one of a number of his designs for the Newfoundland Environment Centre in Canada. This is one of the roof gardens. I chose this one because it again references the interlocking and subtle level changes that he used at Burwood Place. Next. I'm getting a bit of home envy here. This is Philipp Hicks' home at Torres Cove in Newfoundland, a traditional saltbox house in clapboard, where he made a very small garden and worked with the tricky climate. He enjoyed reading, traveling, and collecting art. Next. He was an exceptionally good cook, and having tried food in restaurants he thought that food was not so good, and he trained himself as a cordon bleu cook, providing excellent meals for friends and his home at Torres Cove. Next. My exploration of Hicks' work started when I worked at Land Use Consultants in 1998 and was asked to look at the courtyard at the Sanderson Hotel, which was having a makeover at the time by Philip Stark, appointed by Ian Schrager. It was known that the courtyard had been designed by Philipp Hicks and had been referenced in a few articles at the time. His work at Birdseye had been noted whilst the Birdseye site was being considered for redevelopment and was written up by Todd Longstaff Gowan in the London Gardener. We couldn't find any other references to Hicks and asked Todd where we might find more information. He suggested that due to the length of time since Hicks had worked on the project, we might try the Times obituary. Undaunted, my colleague Jane McEwish contacted the RIBA and found a phone number for Hicks in Canada. She called him and told him that we were working on the Sanderson project and that the courtyard had been listed by English Heritage as a site of historical significance, among very few other examples from the mid-20th century. He was astounded, extremely humble, and just started laughing. We wanted to find out more and visited Burwood Place to see what he had done. This was back in 1998. Actually, I'll just carry on talking over this slide. I've got two more slides, but I'm not going to show them because they're just text. Anyway, so visiting Burwood Place, I didn't think much more about the water garden or the Sanderson courtyard, but was curious about Jup Dernbach Mayen. In 2017, I read in my local paper, the Camden Journal, that the architect Richard Burton of Aaron's Burton Correlec, ADK, had died. The piece noted that his father-in-law was the designer Jup Dernbach Mayen, and that his wife, Jup Dernbach Mayen's daughter, actually lives just down the road from me. Their son John Burton runs Trinity Boy Wharf, who I also know from other projects. So I went to see Jup Dernbach Mayen's daughter Muriel, who has an extraordinary collection of Mayen's work. Annabel Downs, Kate Harwood and I have visited a number of sites, including the Sanderson Hotel, Burwood Place Water Gardens and Hamel Hampstead Water Garden. And when Annabel asked me to talk about Burwood Place, I thought I'd better find out a bit more, which is where, being a member of the Garden Trust Garden History Society comes in handy. Among our worldwide membership, we have a very keen supporter in St. John's, Newfoundland, Cynthia Boyd, and I asked her if she had heard of Philip Hicks. It just so happened she worked in a bookshop that Hicks used to frequent, and she put me in touch with Betty Hall, who is one of Philip Hicks' executors, and another friend of his, Caroline Home, the daughter of the architect Charles Cullum, who had trained with Hicks at the AA and encouraged Hicks to emigrate to Canada in the 1970s. Caroline and Betty, executors to Hicks' estate, hold all the information that I've used. Thank you to them and to Caroline's brother. And I've only actually only used a very small part of the material that they've given me access to in this talk. Next slide. So for me, the jewel in the crown of the Hicks estate came between this Christmas, literally, and New Year from Hugh Cullum, Caroline's brother, who is an architect in London and also happens to live just down the road from me. He asked if I would like to pop in and see some of Hicks's drawings he had just found. I tell you again, this was New Year this year. Hugh was clearing space in his office and actually just looking for a cardboard tube. I love this, to send off some drawings for another project. The tube he picked held a collection of some 15 of Hicks' original drawings. We unrolled the drawings together, and I was completely blown away to see the original designs for the water gardens and Bird's Eye HQ and the co-op, which I've shown you, which are, just go back to the drawing again, which are exquisite drawings that I hope, well, I say I hope, I now know that will be deposited along with the rest of Philip Hicks' archive at FOLAR. I just want to say a couple of things about this drawing. One is it's a beautiful drawing and expresses what Hicks was trying to do. The trees, really simple palette of planting. Most of the big trees were weeping willow. Hence, I suppose, the connection to direct connection that Christina has already explained into the planters, and some magnolias. The rest of the planting was incredibly simple, as was the paving. What Hicks was expressing was this incredible geometry of very simple orthogonal layout, but then emphasized by the elevation through steps and different levels. And as I say, this drawing really expresses that beautifully. So thank you very much. That's it.
Dominic, that's fantastic. I feel like swearing.
So do I.
That's absolutely amazing. That has to take star place in terms of finding of material and everything. Absolutely wonderful. Wow. So I think I need a good drink now. But before that, we're going to move on to Jan. I don't know how you're going to follow that, Jan.
Yeah, sure. Well, I can't beat that. No, it's impossible. Well done, Dominic. Yeah, great find. Yeah, I was introduced. I can start with that whilst I try to share my screen.
Oh, right. I was going to introduce you properly.
Oh, right. Oh, well, yeah, you could do that.
Okay. So Jan is landscape architect and historian, has been teaching at the Department of Landscape Architecture at the University of Sheffield since 1995. His PhD explored the modernist landscape design and theory in 5 different countries and has concentrated particularly on the landscape associated with the home. He's published widely and spread his focus beyond landscape modernism. And I'm very pleased to say he's also a member of the FOLA committee. So over to you. I will go away.
Thank you very much. Yes, I'll just put this on full screen. Yes, it all works. It's beautiful. Yes, I first saw this through a friend of mine, Gordon Ballard, who lived in an estate of the Church Commissioners nearby, and also was a member of the Garden History Society, one of the initial members. And that was also in 1988, when I just started to work at the Architectural Association. But you know, one of the things which we've got to realize is that the notion of such gardens isn't anything new. We've, I mean, the gardens elevated on terraces, which is basically what this development was about. And throughout history, there has been this notion of the hanging gardens of Babylon, which was also sort of gardens on top of roofs. And the most fantastic one probably was Joseph Paxton's great exhibition. And what followed, his proposal for the Great Victorian Way, which was a raised road all the way around London, which was to look like the Great Exhibition building, but then multiplied and alongside, on top of this road, as a sort of a shopping street, and with associated gardens and shops all the way around London. A fantastical dream, which he managed to raise considerable funds for, but ultimately wasn't executed by his early death. And it has been sort of these terraced gardens have been a 20th century dream, of a modernist dream. And the best one probably, which is expressed, is that at Fritz Lang's film Metropolis of 1927, where you can see these terraces here, all and these raised platforms, the vertical city, the city of gardens on roofs, which was also, yep, something is happening. Which is also what was taken on by Le Corbusier, the great modernist architect, when he was asked to do to create an apartment on the rooftop of a house on Champs-Élysées for the great interior designer Bustilly. Which was a garden on a number of different levels, which ultimately was there. Here you can see it with the curtains closed. One moment, I'll just gotta get myself out of the way. With the curtains closed, these curtains consisted of hedges, which could be pressed with a button, and they would slide open. And this is what you see here at the top on the left-hand side, with this revealing the view of the interior of Paris and the Arc de Triomphe. He also proposed this for these roof gardens and these different levels for his Radiant City proposal, a proposal for an ideal modernist city with a division of living, work, and industry, and different locations, and with the living world considered to have consist of enormous high-rise blocks that would carry roof gardens on the very top floor. And therefore, this was the greenest city ever, because on the ground floor, the buildings were on pilotis, and you would have sort of 105% green space here in these cities. All great nonsense, of course, but it worked to sell his projects, and something that he was extremely successful in. But the reality, of course, was slightly different, with different levels of cars and underpasses which had to be created to pass this world of make-believe. And similar worlds, of course, also existed in Great Britain. Jellicoe created this world of Motopia, which consisted of a road system on top of the high-rise blocks. And again, you can sort of see the Corbusian influence here. This was something that was fed through 2 different proposals. The best one of these, which expresses this brave new world, was that for the vertical solution at Hook New Town. Hook was a proposed new town to the southwest of London, and these were illustrated to great extent with these beautiful drawings of this world where happy pedestrians lived separated from the car and on different levels. The reality, of course, of such places, as we've seen in many housing developments in London and elsewhere, is that this causes significant problems. And the informal surveillance, which is so required to make these places a success, is lacking. And it can only work in places where there is a set sort of middle-class culture, and those were foreseen everywhere. I've just given an English example. I'm just giving a Dutch example of the same period. Again, a proposal that envisaged this sort of split-level world, this vertical city, where people would be live happily on these platforms, beautifully designed spaces, but perhaps not the kind of world which I envisage to be the most successful. In this country, it was the Barbican that became the greatest of these projects and became a sort of a middle-class area, and has been continually maintained and have been upgraded over time. Here you see the buildings on pilotis, the water features, all as part of what you would see, what you have just seen at Philip Hicks's proposal for Burwood Place. And yeah, just a couple of slides to give you an impression of that sort of amazing world before it was refurbished recently. Different levels of platforms, and well, with, in this case, added planters, later edition. So Philip Hicks wasn't conceived in a vacuum, these water gardens, and they were conceived as part of a movement that in a way has continued. And I'm finishing off with late 20th century rooftop garden, which was as part of a housing development, a middle-class housing development of Berliner Straße, which is the great avenue, the early 18th century avenue from Potsdam to Berlin, where there was some bomb damage of 1920s housing, and it was rebuilt in the early 1990s, which is on top of a garage, a parking garage, where the buildings hang over the parking garage, so that all the ground is available for the people there, with an ecological layout, as it is referred to, with the outlets for the car park being underneath the stairs for the buildings, and all the water that is captured is being recycled and circulated throughout the project. There is there are play spaces created within that, all on top of this roof garden, which you would not imagine is a roof garden. So this is what you could say a postmodernist sort of solution for this kind of movement to create roof gardens, and which have become not only a utility but also have become much more common practice, which you see in many places on the continent, particularly in cities, to basically dispose of the car and provide people with increased space in which they can live, and where, as you can see in this case, ecology can also sort of do its service to a greater extent than has been possible in many of the modernist projects which have been referred to here too. This has taken on greater dimensions, and some people have been rather fantastical and dreaming up ideas for further cities, and particularly Richard Register has made his name, an American architect, of these, and a lot of what has happened in Singapore has been inspired by sort of his notions of rooftop gardens and vertical cities, and the notion of ecology. But we also know that this is more sort of window dressing rather than real ecology, because a lot of this requires incredible resources with respect to energy and feeding regimes and making it possible. But in different climates, there are sometimes potentials to make these concepts work, as has been in Singapore, where this has been experimented with to a much larger extent than elsewhere. So I thank you very much. This is sort of concludes the aspects, yeah, and shows that this notion of the rooftop terrace and the garden can be taken on to serve our current requirement for ecology and sustainability to a much greater extent than has been possible in the past. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Jan and Christina and Dominic. What a roller coaster of a set of presentations. Christina's stunning, talking us through the restoration project, then Dominic's bombshell about Canada, and followed up, Jan, yes, you did pull it off, Jan. I mean, anyone who can take us from Babylon to Metropolis via Paris, Germany, and Singapore was doing pretty well. So let's have a look at what we've got in the way of questions. I know there's some there for you, Christina. Let me just get the technology working. Yes, Christine asks, I wonder how you manage the problem of seeds and leaves falling in the water, causing a buildup of debris and the return of the problems that you restored. Not that you didn't restore the problems, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, first of all, the leaves from the trees and the plant, there are skimmers across all the ponds, and but they're wildlife friendly, so they have a grid, so you don't have so if they have ducks or ducklings, you don't fall in them, and also let's not forget it still is a luxury development, so it's being cleaned regularly, and there's a lot of upkeeping, but the skimmers do play an important role. And so that they do capture a lot of the leaves that then are removed. regularly. Compared to before, we did build these underwater planters so they could contain the soil, and the soil wouldn't be spread across the whole of the pond, which is an important factor to keep it clean. And at the moment, there's more than 400 sort of fish. We've got some large carp in one pond, and we have about, there must be another 400 sort of goldfish on the other, and a heron that's becoming very fat as well.
Can I just skip to my own question, Christina, and then work back to the one about consultation? The water system does sound utterly amazing. Does it still work as intended, and have there been any unexpected outcomes?
It does, and it's amazing, and it's so sustainable. It's one of the best features, I think, of that garden, and it's such a learning sort of a lesson for us, and that now we struggle to actually implement sustainable podium decks garden, or we, like Jan was saying, have walls, green walls that are not exactly that sustainable, and the fact that they have pond water connecting to the pond, like having a water table, is amazing. And it's great because that is what allows trees to grow to that size. Otherwise it would be impossible for a willow of that size to grow so quickly on a planter. Even if the planter is 8 by 8, you can see the size, and it still does. And it has to be kept sort of functioning, so you have to remove any debris that might build up on the sort of outlets of the base, but the fact that it's been carefully built with stones of different gradients, so then it kind of interlocks, and there's no geotextiles being used in the planter, but it's simply a cape being built with stones that becomes thinner and thinner as it goes up the upper part of the planter, and then you have the subsoil and then topsoil. It means that it keeps on working well, and there's that capillary action within the planter that works. And obviously the soil was carefully specified by Tim O'Hare, who was keen that the right soil was implemented on site.
Thanks very much, Christina. Annabelle, are you willing to unmask yourself and perhaps talk us through your quick questions and comments, starting with the consultation one?
Oh yes, I just wondered, Christina, what form of consultation happened with the residents and things, and are they a community?
Well, the water garden itself is a community because it has about 200 apartments. So, with there are about 16, 17 floors going up to the sky, and 3 of them. Then you have the southern part, the crescent, Norfolk Crescent, which is actually not strictly part of the water gardens, but they face onto the scheme. So the consultation was actually with the 3 apartment blocks and the apartment block to the side, and we set up for twice a consultation boards in the foyer at the entrance on the first block, and we had people coming in several evenings to discuss and chat and ask us questions of what we were planning to do. And one of the major requests was about reinstalling mature trees, because a lot of the people that were there were scared that if we installed small trees, they wouldn't have the lifetime to see them grow. They wanted to see the garden again with those key features within each planter. And so there was an effort was made to do that specifically.
Can I just follow up, Annabelle, if I may? Did you advance order the planting, and if so, from whom and for how long in advance?
So the planting, the trees were installed during construction, so a year before the end of construction, so we could have a full 2 years of liability in case something went wrong. And we went to Germany to get them because we needed the mature plants. We couldn't find them, the ones that we wanted specific for that size.
Interesting, thank you very much. Annabelle, do you just want to mention your other comments and queries?
No, I'll come back to that. Do ask other people. I'm just padding.
Camilla, I won't ask you to unmask yourself, but yes, I think we all applaud the that incredible find. I'm back with you, Annabelle. How many people does the water garden serve? That
No,
been
said that.
answered. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
absolutely. Rosemary says, did you return any of the original plants, or did you change the character of the planting completely? Rosemary, do you actually want to ask that question yourself, or would you prefer to stay anonymous? It's, well, not anonymous, but shrouded in mystery. I'll take that as a, I'll speak for you unless you,
Hello.
Dominic?
Yeah, I don't know how to raise a question, but I have a couple of points.
Okay.
I obviously respect my fellow presenters, but I do have a couple of issues. First, with Jan's presentation, which it's brilliant. It puts it so-called puts it in context. But my reading of what Hicks did at the Water Garden was that he was not following a fashion. He was actually just being a landscape architect, designing a beautiful place for people to live in. He was totally in understanding and in the grip of the technicalities. Clearly, there have been issues since, blah, blah, blah. But basically, he was presented with some concrete slabs and built his garden on top of that. I don't think he was actually creating a garden in the sky. I think he was doing something practical to make a beautiful place. And secondly, with Christina's work, which follows, current thinking about ecology, about rainwater preservation, blah, blah, blah. I've got two issues with this, or a couple of issues. One is I do not understand why the water is blue, why there are kind of fountains and stuff all over the place, where Hicks was actually using water as a mirror as part of his design. It was reflecting the sky, the plants, etc., etc., and the moving water actually is a complete distraction from that. And secondly, related, is that the now detail in the paving is also a distraction. Philipp Hicks worked with very, very simple materials and very simple palette of ideas. It was about the abstraction of shapes and spaces and blah, 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 blah. I think I'm just making a point and having a rant. Thank you.
Starting with Jan, do you want to come back on that, Jan?
Oh yeah, I could come back. I mean, of course, Philip was trying to make a beautiful place, and that's what all landscape architects involved with roof gardens are trying to do. But it's clearly, I mean, he was presented with a set of terraces, which he worked with and created the place on. But that's the same with the last example, the German example, which I showed you. It is just done within a different sort of design language, so to speak. Yeah, I can.
Sorry, could I just come back on that?
Yes,
I don't want to dominate, but what I think the point that I'm interested in is that this series of talks is about the work of 20th century landscape architects.
Yeah.
That first of all are not understood, haven't been recognized, and they are very beautiful pieces of art in their own right. I would point, I suppose, to the work that was done on in London on the South Bank at the Festival Hall, where the original concept of the exterior spaces has not been lost. There have been changes, but the actual materials and the way that things have been changed have been kept very simple. And because inevitably, as we all know, as landscape architects, the materials were cheap and simple and so on and so on, they were actually used in a very clever way. And yet we come along 30, 50 years later and decide that they were a bit crap, and we decide to change them. You know, look at the Commonwealth building in Kensington, which, you know, we know was a lovely Sylvia Crowe design, which was completely rubbished by English Heritage when they made their assessment and was destroyed.
Dominic, can I interrupt you? I'd like to hear from Christina about the comments you made on the restoration, if you may.
Forgotten now. There's so many.
Oh, I think there was.
I'll start with the. I think there was a question from Karen as well regarding the paving. Now, we couldn't save the paving. There was a picture you showed, Dominic, with the plants actually planted within the paving. And you can imagine what happened when there was actually swamp cypress planted in the actual paving. It meant that all the roots had gone everywhere inside that slab. And the paving had actually been replaced, bits and pieces, several areas, and it was cracking. So the actual, once we lifted those paving slabs, there were roots everywhere, and they were actually perforating the concrete. So, you know, it was difficult. It had to be removed, and so we designed a paving that would highlight the beauty of the brutalist linearity features and would depict the rhythm of the garden that Philipp Hicks we thought had intended. I mean, we're all speculating because we don't know what Philipp Hicks really intended, so we're all entitled to our opinion, and I'm very happy we all have different opinions. But we really tried to complement what is already there and highlight the beauty through the use of lights, but also the linearity of the garden itself.
Sorry, Christina, do carry on.
And then the other was about, I forgot what the other question was now.
The water?
The water,
yes.
Yeah.
Water, the fountains were there already. You can see them on the RIBA images when it was just opened. Those fountains you see everywhere were there. The ones we added were the ones next to the bridge. It was more about, after reading Philipp Hicks' article about water being an experience, and he talks about walking through a bridge and experiencing the water, experiencing the fountain, the movement, that we added those. We also needed more oxygenation within the garden. The water actually doesn't have a filter. It relies on natural movement of water to oxygenate and keep the water clean, but they are often switched off to allow that mirror effect, which I do agree with you, it's beautiful. But the other fountains you see dotted around were there already, I'm afraid, and we have pictures to prove that. And lastly, the other question, sorry, I'm becoming now old and I can't remember what was
the colour of the water.
Oh, the colour of the water, yes. The colour of the water, that blue was only there in the first year to avoid for the for it to turn completely green with algae straight away, because the water and the system had to sort of generate and acclimatize itself, and we would have otherwise been at risk that it would have been completely consumed by algae and would have removed all the oxygen from the water. So it was blue for a reason for the first year. It was a maintenance issue. It's not blue now. It's actually, if you go to the water garden, it's turning green because it naturally tries to go back to have this algae, which removes oxygen from the water, which is always a struggle. And that's why we have the oxygenation from the water, from the fountain, which is important.
Before I come back to you, Dominic, could also, Christina, would you, the question about original plants, did you change the character of the planting completely? Just a very quick one on that, if you wouldn't mind.
Well, if you see the Philipp Hicks intention was to have very large trees within the planters and then lower perennials and plant levels. What was there, and when we approached the garden, was not the original plants from Philipp Hicks. They were what was developed over 50 years of additions, including the ones inside the paving. So, and those were, some of them were removed, placed in other areas of the Hyde Park estate. But it was very difficult after 50 odd years to preserve a tree that is 15 meters high. And remove it and place it somewhere else. So,
thanks, Christina, for that. Dominic, you have 2 minutes maximum, and then we must move on and let people have their evening meals or whatever.
Okay,
George?
I mean, I think my points really are: do we really understand the design intent and what was achieved in these gardens from the mid-20th century? And do we go far enough in exploring and understanding who laid them out, why they were laid out in a certain way, what effect they have, and is it really necessary to update, trendify the original design by introducing new changes? All the things that have been done at the Water Garden, the technicalities are brilliant, and those technicalities could equally be applied to a very careful and considered restoration to represent the original design as it was intended. The water circulation, the water capture, the way that plants are grown, all of those could be applied to actually repairing and rescuing an original design. And I would point again to the Sanderson Hotel courtyard, where the beech tree, which was part of the original concept, had grown up to, I don't know, 10 meters, maybe a bit less. But somebody decided that it was a bit rubbish, so that they replaced all that wonderful, really considered planting with some kind of nitwitty Japanese garden, which bears no relationship to the original idea. It was unnecessary.
Excuse me. Thank you, Dominic. Excuse me. With regard to your first comment regarding knowing what people's wanted their desires to achieve, I think the answer is clearly no, we don't know. And I've ranted about that before in these talks. But I'd like, Annabelle, would you like to come in at this point and perhaps advise us on how we can improve on the comments that Dominic has made, and perhaps also thank our speakers for their extraordinarily stimulating presentations.
Well, I think, as you say, thank you, Helen. I think, as you say, I think the knowledge or the information is piecemeal, and I think everything that we, find and pull together and make sure that it's available and people know where it is, then I think that's all for the better. I think it's a conundrum, really. So I'm going to duck out of that one.
Could I, sorry, I'm sorry to be, keep butting in.
Yeah.
But I think in terms of understanding these places,
yeah,
the client or whoever it is needs to actually make sure that the person dealing with the job actually understands what they're dealing with. Well,
and vice versa. Doesn't the client need to know the value of what they've got?
Yes, but very often the client is ill-advised by other people. Example being the Commonwealth Institute, where English Heritage actually asked advice from landscape architects who had absolutely no experience of historic landscapes, particularly 20th century historic landscapes, and the comment made on those particular on that particular garden was that it was, inverted commas, not a very good design using cheap material. That person who made the comment was actually an intern in a landscape architect's office who had no previous experience of dealing with historic landscapes.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, this has been an issue right away through historic landscape, and particularly when we're talking about sort of scheduled or listed, registered landscapes, then this is becoming more of an issue, of course. And we should be giving the same amount of care to all these landscapes, and we should consider very carefully what we replace and what we keep. And I'm afraid with a lot of the 20th century instances and the landscapes which I've looked at, things have gone wrong. And we are losing a very important element of many of these landscapes. So it is something that should be considered in each and every case, and which ought to, I mean, whether you then keep it or not, or whether you replace it, is then another decision. But it certainly is an important part of the characteristic of that particular period, is the use and the application of the materials, which was often done with great care, as I pointed out last week, with respect to the span estates, where in some of which all the paving has been replaced. In Field End, it has been retained, which I think is of benefit to show the original concept. And so it is an issue, and it is, and we should consider this as careful as the paint on a Van Gogh painting. It is the color matters. It's not the shade; it is the exact texture as well as the shade of color, and that isn't always conveyed in restoration schemes, and it is of restoration schemes of any period. And how do we know that this is of importance? As soon as you start registering it, it of course does, and it is something that we should pay attention to, because these things are all disappearing very, very quickly. And in a few years, we won't have any examples anymore. I mean, I'm sort of looking at York University at the moment, and that's not going the right way either. And it's all these, what do you show as being sort of a typical mid-20th century landscape? And there are issues. And there are different types of answers, and there's one solution won't do for all, but we should consider it. And and that is in that I support Dominic to a great extent.
Well, thank you, Jan, thank you, Dominic, for raising, and thank you, Christina, for raising all that. And I think that's something that we at FOLA really need to give some very serious consideration to, and look at how we can support and expose these issues that you've raised. Annabelle.
Yes, well, I also think, sorry, that the adding the water gardens to the list only happened, I think, Christina, perhaps you can verify that, sort of like halfway through Christina's work.
It happened when it was completed.
Oh, right, okay.
It happened last year.
Thanks for that. But on our chair's behalf, I would like to thank you three very, very much indeed for that most brilliant and stimulating discussion talks. We really do appreciate it, and I think it is something that we need to talk to you again about how FOLA can best support. Thank you very much indeed.